everyone. Ordinarily, I would say I'm happy to see you, but this is not an occasion for happiness. Let me introduce myself. I am Diane Walter. I'm the Executive Director of Margaret's Housing and Community Support Services. Thank you for being here. Let me tell you why we're here, but before I say why we're here, it is important to acknowledge of the land that we gather is the traditional territory of many indigenous peoples, including the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We recognize and respect the enduring relationship that indigenous peoples have had with the ancestral land. We acknowledge the harms and injustices inflicted on indigenous communities through colonization, forced assimilation, and ongoing systemic oppression. We're committed to learning from and working in partnership with indigenous peoples to build a more inclusive and equitable society. As we gather on this land to honor the elders past, present, and emerging, and express our gratitude for their stewardship of this land throughout generations. So let us now begin this news conference. As you're aware, homelessness is a crisis writ large. However, there has been homelessness crisis in the African community, and more specifically, the refugee communities. A significant portion of the folks that are here camped out at 129 are those who are not housed and without any shelter or community services and supports. African groups and civil society are deeply concerned and what appears to be a lack of action to address the housing crisis faced by the migrants. And we call on everyone to do something immediately. There are approximately 30 or more African people at any given time sleeping on cardboards, sleeping extremely rough, potentially on this concrete that we stand on. Right outside 129 Peter Street, the City of Toronto Referral and Assessment Center. We're here today to raise the issues and demand substantive action from all levels of government, but more specifically, the province and the feds. I'd like to call upon, let me see, Kizito Musavena, who really is the driving force in terms of galvanizing this news conference and reaching out to many folks in the community. Kizito is also the executive director for the Rwandan Healing Center. Here, Kizito.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you all. This is incredible, but also heartbreaking that it takes what we're doing right now in order to get the answers that we need. But today, it has to be today. We actually say it's yesterday, but we need the answer today. So our office, the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center, our office is just across the street. And we've been seeing the numbers at 129 Peter grow every day for the last 2 months or so. And for us as an organization, we were wondering what's causing this level of cruelness, really, is what we thought. But at the same time, we wanted to understand how come everybody's pointing fingers. The federal government is pointing fingers, the municipality, the city was pointing fingers or is saying they need help, and the provincial government, of course, sometimes is not at the table. We want everybody to get at the table and answer to everybody here. Make sure. I came to Canada in 2000. I came here as a refugee from Rwanda. I went through my own challenging journeys, but the country I came to, the country that received me, was not this. When we came to Canada, we were well received. We had homes. Of course, we had people that can support us. But that's not the case for our brothers and sisters, especially most of them happen to be Africans, as you could see. So we want to know, first of all, what's taking too long for the governments, for different entities to answer the call. But most importantly, we want to see the action taken not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, today, now. And so with that said, thank you so much. And I really want our brothers and sisters, our migrants who are here to understand, to know that there is so many people who are working so hard, so many communities across Canada, black, white, everybody, in the non-for-profit, in the shelters, different groups have been working really hard to support you. And we want you to know that we are going to continue to do that. And to that, I want to introduce a group of individuals who are heading different organizations that are doing exactly that. So the next speakers are Deputy Harry Cogan, the Executive Director of the Soldier House, and Manny Wang, Executive Director of Christie Refugee Welcome Center, as well as Lori Rico, the Executive Director of the FCJ Refugee Center. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Tito. I'm very privileged to be here today. And as I look around, I think it's pretty obvious the reason that we're all here. Shelters are at capacity. City staff are tied without resources. Hotels are closing. Refugees are being told to call Service Canada. Staff there probably don't even know why they're calling. This is shameful. Where is our government's moral compass? This is a sanctuary city, or I thought it was, a welcoming city. I have worked in this sector for over 30 plus years. Never have I seen refugees ever used as pawns. My taxes pay for a Department of Emergency Management. Is this not an emergency? In 2022, Sojourn House, which is a refugee-specific shelter, moved 108 families with the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit. It needs to come back. That would have freed up 108 rooms for 108 more refugee families arriving in Canada. It ended very abruptly. We need an urgent and emergency response.
I'm from Christie Refugee Welcome Center, a 76-bed shelter for refugee claimant families, and I'm here to tell you about one family that we've helped through this crisis. On July 5th, a single mom with a 9-year-old and a 13-year-old arrived in Canada from Kenya. They were told to come here to Peter Street. They were then told to call Central Intake, who told them to call Service Canada, who told them to call Central Intake, who told them to call Service Canada. Frustrated, dejected, and scared to have her children sleep on the street in a city she didn't know, she used the last of her savings to stay in a hotel. When her money ran out after 4 nights in the hotel, she came back here. And luckily, an outreach worker told her to call us. And we told her to come to our shelter immediately and we'll pay for the cab when you get here. She's staying in our dining room. We've connected her with a refugee lawyer who's helping her with her refugee claim and other paperwork. On Wednesday, her 9-year-old son had his 10th birthday, and we had a gathering and gave him a basket of birthday gifts. He had a big smile on his face, and his mom told us it was the first time he smiled after 7 days in Canada. Luckily, he didn't have to sleep on the street on his 10th birthday. And that's just one story of so many stories across shelters and community organizations in Toronto, doing what we can to keep refugee claimants off the street. Because it's the right thing to do. And we're calling on all levels of government to do the right thing. No refugee claimant should sleep on the street one night more. Not one single night more.
I came to Canada 33 years ago, 8 years, and I was welcomed to Canada. I came with my family. I'm originally from El Salvador. They were war. I'm here standing with my brothers and sisters that they are sleeping on the street from all around the world. And I'm here to say shame on the government of Canada. This is not the first time that we see wave of refugees coming to Canada after a conflict arose around the world, and always was bad for them. This is the first time we are seeing refugee claimants sleeping on the street. This is shame. Yes. We should be ready for this situation. As we around the world, there are millions of people being displaced, and especially from Africa. I'm here standing to demand to all the different levels of government to take the responsibility now. And we ask, especially to the city of Toronto, that they should open the beds now, and to establish a reception center for refugee claimants and precarious migrants. Enough is enough. It is very sad that at the FCJ Refugee Center, when we open, there is people with the luggage on the stairs or on the gardens. And we need to open that doors, and we keep the doors open. But it's very sad because when you call central intake, there is no beds, there is no places, and really, there is a time for an action. There is a government responsibility, and I'm calling specifically to the Prime Minister that he has been saying around the world that he welcomes, Canada welcomes refugees. Stop talking, stop saying words, take an action and really give a bed for refugee claimants now, that they can start living in Canada with dignity.
My name is Sumi with Street Haven. It's a multi-service women's agency that's been on the front line serving women and homeless women since 1965. We established Canada's first women's shelter in '68, and today we operate 2 shelter programs, including a COVID shelter hotel and 75 beds. Currently, 80% of our shelter clients are African refugees and newcomers. We're at maximum capacity. There is no additional space to meet their shelter demands that we're seeing. And because there's no adequate and affordable housing for our current shelter clients to move into, there's been no movement in and out of our 2 shelter locations. This has created pent-up demand for our women's only shelter beds. And the last 3 weeks, we've had to turn away over 250 African women. We have been helping helpless women for nearly 60 years, and we've never seen this kind of humanitarian disaster. As a women's agency, our motto is women helping women, and it is disheartening and demoralizing for my team to send away hundreds of African women who are in desperate need of help. These women arrive at our shelter expecting help and a temporary roof, and when we're unable to assist them, they become extremely upset, and some will often cry. They've even taken the risk of sleeping in encampments. The lack of affordable housing, the absence of the Canadian Ontario housing benefits and other subsidies to help afford market rent, and the complete policy failure in helping African refugees and newcomers has become the perfect storm where we are seeing women, men, and youth camping out at sidewalks and in encampments. Governments are playing hot potato with the lives of these Africans who have traveled across continents and left everything they know and care about to come to a better and safer place. What is needed immediately are more shelter beds for African refugees and newcomers, and we need substantive incremental increases in the Canadian Ontario housing benefits to Toronto to help those in current shelters to move on to their next home. By the time summer is over, 60% of my shelter clients will be COB eligible. This means that if they have access to that benefit, they can move on to their next home. And this would free up 47 more beds to the Toronto system.
We've heard from shelter workers and executive directors. Now we'll hear from folks who've actually lived it. I welcome Mr. Sally, who's actually living here on the concrete at 129 Peter Street. Mr. Sally.
Oh, thank you, all the neighbors, all the people of Canada. At least I've seen that people of Canada do love the migrants from the rest of the countries, like Africa. I'm born in 1986. I'm from Uganda. I have a family. Where I come from, in Uganda, we have the dictatorship. We have the dictatorship in our country. Nobody would love to leave his country. Nobody would love to leave his country. But it is on a pressure whereby you want to remove the dictator, but you end up being killed, tortured, nowhere to sleep. So, your intention, if you feel like you're going to be killed, you feel like, no, let me shift to any other country. So in all perspectives, I chose Canada. But unfortunately, I'm here for almost 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Apart from getting food from the Good Samaritans, and clothing, but I'm feeling so sad, but I sleep on the street. It rains. It drizzles since I came, now 4 days when it drizzles. But, so I feel so sad. I don't have much to say, but I feel sad. On behalf of the migrants and those who seek for refugee, we did expect that. We expected to be well. We expected at least people of Canada, the central government, whatever it's called, to welcome us. But we feel so sad. We don't have much to say, but we call upon everybody at least to guide us, to help us, to have where to sleep. That could be the best of us. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Diana Chan McNally. Alongside Lorraine Lamb, many of my colleagues, volunteers, we have started a GoFundMe and raised almost $40,000 to at least take care of the folks who are stranded out here, some of whom have been here for over a month, living on the sidewalk without any shelter at all. I have come to 129 Peter Street every single day to ensure that people who are here, African asylum claimants, almost exclusively forced to live on this sidewalk, receive support to meet their most basic needs: nutrition, hydration, rudimentary comfort, sleeping mats we're giving people, and the ability to stay clean and dry. Every single day, I am appalled at the conditions people are forced to endure here. Through no fault of their own, we know this. They are out here on the sidewalk, completely exposed to the elements. There are hundreds of people in drop-ins who are not properly resourced to be able to support them. While different levels of government bicker over funding and jurisdiction, human lives are being utilized as political leverage, largely by elected representatives who refuse to view the impacts of their policymaking on the people who are here. I have seen a man with trench foot. This is the year 2023, and we have people here with diseases that we saw in the trenches of World War I. All because people are unable to stay dry. Last night, they were completely soaked through. Their bedding was wet. Shameful. A young woman, Catherine, told me that when it rains, security guards force her to expose her face to the rain because covering her face is a security risk. Another young woman, Chamsa, tells me about her hunger pangs and headaches from not being able to eat enough food on a daily basis. Some days she doesn't get anything at all. I have seen a woman covered in her own menstrual blood, unable to access running water to clean herself. These are the conditions that people are living in. This is one of the wealthiest cities in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and this is how we're treating people. It is fundamentally wrong. It is a blight on Canada, which touts its leadership on human rights. But to see people fleeing traumatic situations, having their human rights violated so egregiously, we should be ashamed of ourselves. When I look around, I see human beings who are being abandoned by an uncaring government. And to be sure, while the city must be held account for rescinding shelter for refugees, jurisdiction for their support and care ultimately falls squarely on the shoulders of the federal government. Liberal MPs, again, none of whom have come down to actually see the impacts of their callousness on the people who are here. I call on them. And I call on Justin Trudeau to commit the funding for shelter and supports for refugees and act. Not talk about it, but act. Act. To ensure that their human rights, the human rights of people here, of people like Osman, are upheld. For people who want to help amplify our message, contact your MP and let them know that this is unacceptable. Sign the petition from Progress Toronto. Myself and my colleague, Lauren Lamb, and our volunteers, Britt, Dennis, Alexa, Ali, Craig, Suma, Adriana, Jackie, we are purchasing and distributing supplies, and I invite you to support us and help us with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. It is always good. Good morning.
Morning, baby.
And welcome. It's so good to see so many people out here protesting and standing up and saying to our Prime Minister Trudeau, to our Premier Ford, and to our Mayor Chow, time to act. Time to act. Before I say my remarks, I know many of you journalists have been asking for a list of speakers. If you go to the blue tent right here, you will be able to have the list of speakers emailed to you. I also wanted to thank you as journalists for showing up here today, but especially those of you who weeks ago started shining light on this unconscionable situation that we found ourselves in. It is a shame that, as I understand, in the largest city, in one of the richest countries, that we have refugee people who came to our shores seeking protection, sleeping on our sidewalk. This is truly an unconscionable situation. This is a humanitarian crisis. It is obscene. It is obscene. As conflicts increase and intensify around the world, and as the impact of global warming escalates in some of the poorest countries in the world, we are likely to see more and more people on the run in search of safety and shelter. Canada claims to be a welcoming place. And as regressive laws are enacted against women, against lesbians, gay, bi, trans, intersex, and queer people across the globe, Canada and cities like Toronto will continue to see people seeking protection and refuge. We must be able to provide a soft landing. Now. A significant number of displaced people and refugee claimants arriving in Canada are African and Black. That is not surprising. About 30 million internally displaced people, refugees and asylum seekers live in Africa, nearly 1/3 the number of refugees globally. In fact, the majority of displaced people in the world, the majority of refugees, are in the global south, in large part because the global north has intensified practices to keep those in need of protection out, such as the extension of the Canada-US Safe Territory Agreement across the whole land border with the US. That is a shame. In the global context, only a very small number of asylum seekers make it to Canada to file a refugee claim. On an annual basis, we bring in about 50,000 refugees through government-assisted sponsorship and through privately sponsored. Last year, Canada accepted about, and I want to get the number right, Canada had 94,000 refugee claims received in 2022. They processed 39,000 835, there was a 68% acceptance rate. We need to do better, and we need to ensure that all those who are seeking protection in Canada are accepted, that they have a safe place to lay their head, that they have the necessities, and that they have access to education, to legal services, so that their claims claims are completed and submitted on time. Just over a year ago, we applauded as Canadians, as Torontonians, as Toronto and Canada and Ontario opened up our doors and welcomed Ukrainian displaced people. We should be proud of that. But all people in need of protection should receive the same response from our governments. All people, regardless of race, regardless of sexuality, regardless of gender, must receive equitable treatment from our government. We are so pleased to see how African and Black community organizations have stepped up to support these newly arrived claimants, to open up their homes, to arrange appropriate services and supports, this in spite of the fact that many have been unfunded or underfunded. So it's only about 10 years ago that the federal government defunded a significant number of African organizations. That has been a shame. Other organizations as well, many of who are here, have been reaching out. You heard from some of my colleagues earlier on. But while this community show of support and mutual aid is important and is necessary, it is not sustainable. Community organizations and community members alone cannot do this. We need our governments to take up their responsibilities, their humanitarian obligations to all refugees and displaced people who make it to our shores, seeking safety and protection, not just a few and not from only specific countries. Prime Minister Trudeau, Premier Ford, Mayor Chow, the time is now to act. Now. Thank you. I now welcome Dr. Ben Rashid.
Thank you, Debbie. So I'm a family physician that's worked with refugees in the shelter system and primary care and hospitals for quite a long time. And as you all know, refugees do very well in Canada. The literature shows rates of employment are high and the majority become very well educated and thrive in Canadian society. Why is that? Well, we know refugees have endured a grotesque survival test. They've often endured war, torture, hunger, systemic persecution. They often have torturous and perilous journeys to arrive in Canada. And as such, we see the most determined, the most resourceful. Give them time and most refugees pay it forward in a big way. That was glaringly evident during the pandemic, where so many of our refugee patients were working as essential workers. So many worked as personal support workers, taking care of the sick and the elderly. Others were exposing themselves to risk, delivering groceries and working in factories. But as well as refugees do, those first months in Canada are immensely difficult. Our job as refugee receiving communities is to ensure that we cultivate that immense resourcefulness that refugees bring with them. It is in everybody's interest. And this, of course, is impossible when we leave people homeless. We know the health implications of being homeless. We know the increased risks of violence. We know the consequences of not having adequate hygiene facilities. We know the risk of exposure to weather, and we know that dealing with trauma is impossible when sleeping outside. Our emergency room colleagues tell us they're already seeing these consequences. That is just not good enough. We know that the first few months in Canada are a time where health can be precarious, where people need to transition to a new healthcare system, where the consequences of difficult migration often manifest. We know there's a cost to not addressing these health risks. And we also know that good health is impossible without shelter. I've had the privilege of working with refugee populations for over 20 years. I've heard the stories of how much people have endured, the dangers they've faced. I've also seen how minimal investments have ensured that people are able to succeed and how they've paid off in really large ways. Listen, we've all heard the bickering between different levels of government about the costs of housing people. But what are the costs of leaving people without shelter? We don't want highly vulnerable people to be forced to the street. Let us invest in people and ensure that they flourish. Let's get people off the streets and ensure they're treated with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to call all the speakers to come up now. If you guys could just back up for a minute, they'll need a little space. That's a lovely green dress. If you could just back up a bit. Diana, Saleh, Loli, Debbie, Kizito, Danny, Yazzie. So Christopher, if you could just come on up for us, please. And the Reverend.
Hello and good morning. As a person that has faced homelessness after fleeing persecution from my home country, Uganda, due to my sexual orientation, I am extremely familiar with the pain and frustration faced by the asylum seekers here where they expect to find hope. My name is Christopher Kambwe, the Executive Director of the African Center for Refugees in Ontario, Canada, a refugee serving organization that is supported by refugees and offering humanitarian assistance to refugees right from the country, right from the time they enter the country until they are integrated into the Canadian setting. With regards to the current shelter shortage and housing crisis for asylum seekers, we established an African approach within communities of the African descent, like the Kenyan community, Ugandan community, Ghanaian community, and the Nigerian community, among others, to establish temporary solutions like food donations, community member hosting, and worship center hosting. Together with the different community groups and organizations herein present today, we have tried without any funding to provide temporary shelters to our people to avoid them from spending nights on the streets of Ontario, Toronto. As the African Center for Refugees in Ontario, Canada, we call upon all levels of government to respond to the needs of asylum seekers by 1. Providing necessary funding to refugee-serving organizations. 2. Establish a reception center equipped with mobile social and healthcare services. 3. Decrease on the process time of the asylum seekers. And 4. Restore funding programs that were closed, like Refugee Hotels Program, CORE Program, among others. With me today, I present to you Pastor Eddie Jumba, leading the Ugandan community, a group that make to make a joint remark to the progress so far. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you,
Good evening, good afternoon, good day, depending on where you're tuning in from. I know some people are watching. On behalf of the African community in Canada, I stand honored here to represent. On that note, I'm going to ask my colleagues that are on the front line of the work that we are talking about here to make sure that they are very close by me here. There's an African proverb that says that where two elephants fight, the grass gets trampled on. I'll say it in Uganda for the respect of where it comes from. We are aware that there are some elephants that are fighting in this, but we know that in due time, especially starting now, we'll have a resolve. There's a liberation theologian who says that ignoring the poor or the needy is to show contempt for both God and humanity. Yes. My name is Eddie Jumba. In 2006, August 10, I arrived in this country as an asylum seeker. The rest is history. I'm a Canadian, very proud citizen of Canada right now. We are grateful, but we are not happy. Our brothers and sisters that have been sleeping on the streets here for days and nights in very heavy rainstorms are human beings, just as human as any of you that are here. We want to challenge you to refuse to keep ignoring what is going on. Several dedicated Ugandan organizations in Toronto are tirelessly working to combat the ongoing refugee crisis amid a lack of political resolution on the issue. Groups led by Dominion Church Toronto, University of Toronto, African Alumni Association, African Center for Refugees, and a number of other community organizations such as Center for Black Development Options Canada, My Community, My Concerns. They are doing everything they can to provide shelter for the African refugees. Myself and Mr. Henry Sully of African Alumni, and many people standing behind me here, such as African Center for Refugees, where Chris, my brother here, works, USDAC, Uganda Matters United Church of Canada, Center for Social Justice Initiative, African Descent Ontario, My Community, My Concern, Mlong Foundation, and the community at large initiated a cooperative response to this crisis in an emergency Zoom meeting, believe it or not, that was attended by 195 people. When I learned from one of the members of the community that, Pastor, I don't know if you know, but for the last 21 days, our brothers and sisters have been sleeping on the streets of Toronto. We resolved within our little resources to do something. And I challenge all of us to resolve to do something. We appealed to the community to start opening up their homes. Now, I know this is a very foreign and strange concept to a Canadian mind. But people are literally opening up their homes to complete, total strangers. We know that if the government was to add on to what we are doing, not even the other way around, this problem will be solved in big ways. So we appeal to the government to stop the political football. We implore the community leaders, both the city and the federal government, to step away from the political squabbles and to invest in their communities to address the refugees' housing crisis. The plea to the political leaders is to resolve to invest in the issue now. Rather than use it as a political football. I want to end by saying we are indeed truly deeply grateful. We are just not happy to watch our brothers and sisters being treated as though they are less human beings. I will end with a very unfortunate observation. One of my daughters, I have many spiritual daughters, when she was crossing at the border at customs, she told me, Pastor, there was a big line of us, and at some point an officer came and said, I want to see all of you that are seeking asylum step up to this line. She said so many people stepped into that line, and I said, what kind of people were they? She said many of them were white, many of them were all different kinds of people. But then when you look at 129 Peter Street, you can't help but to ask the question, where did the other people go? And I want somebody to be bothered by that observation. Where did the other people go? There is an over-representation of the black people in the issue of refugees that have no place to go. We are doing everything we can. Some people are housing more than 5 people in their small homes. Some people are housing beyond what you can imagine. But we are calling upon the government to step up, to join us in what we are already doing. We can resolve this problem. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Pastor Eddie, for doing what the government isn't doing. We're almost at the end of the press conference. In response to this crisis, African groups, refugee serving agencies, organizations working with people experiencing homelessness, healthcare providers, and other civil society groups urgently call on the government, and I will reiterate what Christopher asked. There are 4 asks which we're asking. 1, urgently establish reception centers to immediately shelter and support refugee claimants. 2, the federal and provincial governments in particular to ensure that refugee claimants have dedicated shelter space that includes the unique supports that they need, including legal services, healthcare, and appropriate wraparound assistance including immediate emergency and street outreach and mobile resources. The federal government must also take the lead in funding shelter spaces, personnel, and support services. Number 4 and final ask, all governments must identify and immediately support Black-led and Black-serving agencies to remedy historical underfunding or no funding, and build community capacity to provide culturally appropriate wraparound services for refugee claimants. I thank you all for coming, and if you thank you all for coming. If there are any questions from the media, we've got everyone here who can answer your questions. A press release can also be found at rchc.ca/NEWS. I repeat, it's capital, rchc.ca/NEWS. If there are any questions, the Brain Trust is all here. Please shoot. Okay. Can I have?
Thank you. Mark McAllister from City News here in Toronto. Looking for one person perhaps to react. The federal government actually did have a press conference this morning, made an announcement, and I'll leave it to you to react, that they were offering $2 million to an organization called JVS Toronto to help with they are doing, and seemingly that was it. Looking for your reaction.
Well, we're glad that the federal government has stepped up to give $2 million to Jewish Vocational Services. Jewish Vocational Services, as far as I know, do not work with refugee claimants. They're one of our member agencies who have been doing tremendously important work in the sector, working with immigrants and refugees from all over the world. $2 million does not begin to even address the issues that we're seeing here today. What we need is for the federal government to step up and to fund the city of Toronto so that shelters can be provided. We need them to open up settlement services that they fund here in Ontario for everyone, regardless of immigration status, who is in need. And we need the provincial government to also come to the table with resources to Toronto so that we can pay for temporary shelters and we can support those who are already in the shelters, refugee claimants and others, to be able to move to more permanent housing. $2 million does not begin to address this issue. And while I am glad that it's gone to JVS, an organization, as I said, who does tremendously good work, that is not the place where we need the money to be going. We need money to be going to the City of Toronto for housing, for shelter, and for services.
Thank you. Yeah, Steve Ryan from CP24. To anybody here, how does this problem get solved, and how quickly can the problem get solved to get people off the streets?
Open the armory. No, Lola. What? Ask again. Ask sorry, I need
That's okay. Ask again. Oh, how do we solve this problem? I mean, if it's a matter of money being provided or opening up some shelter space, why are people continuing to be sleeping on the streets? And is that a problem that we can solve quickly?
Yeah. The City of Toronto, they have a committee, emergency committee, where they can open immediately like they do in winter time for warming centers, and there is empty spaces in the old city halls. That's something that they can do it immediately. Now.
Right away, right away, right away, right away.
Well, first of all, I think there needs to be a long-term strategy of all levels of government to come together and come up with a plan for arriving refugees that are arriving in Canada. There's never been one. It's always been pass the buck, pass the buck. The feds say the province say the feds. The city's dying for the feds to give them money. The point is, and I did understand that there was going to be a meeting, I I believe it was a meeting today, maybe this afternoon, where the three levels are coming together. I believe our new mayor, Chow, will be meeting with representatives from the province and the federal government specifically on this issue. We're all going to be very much anticipating the outcome.
Thank you for that answer, and a follow-up for anybody here. Was this not something that could have been foreseen? Isn't that something that, it just seems to me that this could have happened just out of the blue, where people show up here, escaping countries where they are traumatized, war-torn countries, and we don't have a place for them. Is this something that should have been foreseen in the future, as opposed to being a surprise?
How many blacks? How many white? How many black? How many white were at the airport?
Thank you for your question. So we'll speak to our experience at Street Haven. We actually saw in December that our client base was beginning to change, and we were seeing more and more African refugees and newcomers. This was something we could have, well in advance, all levels of government, including the City of Toronto, could have predicted that it would only worsen as more months pass by. We've now reached this point of crisis where we're now seeing people camping out on streets and engaging in very unsafe situations. The levels of government, especially the city, could have responded much more earlier, and we've always had concern that the city tends to be a little reactive as opposed to being proactive.
I could even add to emphasize that, my brother, we are looking at more than just a lack of space. We are looking at an issue of disproportionality. The resources are there, they are not proportionately distributed, including space.
One more question. Anybody?
Ukrainians on the street.
You don't care.
I see Africans.
Please pass it to your colleague at the back.
I don't see Ukrainians. I see Africans.
Hi, William Etherington from the Canadian Press. This question is for anyone up here. One of you mentioned that it was the federal government that this is mostly responsible for. But why is this specifically an issue in Toronto, and what would you say to Mayor Olivia Chow and what she could be doing?
Other surrounding areas are seeing an increasing number of refugee claimants as well. We know that a few months ago, the federal government decided to bus many claimants who crossed through Quebec, through Roxham Road and to Niagara region. They paid for hotel spaces there, the way that the City of Toronto is paying for Ukrainian spaces here, and other municipalities surrounding. We say this is a federal issue because immigration is a federal responsibility. Refugee claimants has to be a federal responsibility. Other municipalities are stepping up and joining Toronto to ask the federal government to step up to begin to put resources into the municipalities. The Greater Toronto and Hamilton area all open up hotels to be able to accept and support Ukrainians who arrive, and they're still waiting for the federal government to step up and to support them in that. We are saying back to one of the earlier questions in terms of what the City of Toronto can do immediately. The City of Toronto has a hotel for Ukrainians. They're going to council next week to decide whether or not they're going to extend that agreement. We are calling on them to extend that agreement for Ukrainians, but also to expand it to include those who are here and needing shelter. Let us, the City of Toronto, can go ahead and get space while the fight continues with the federal or provincial government in terms of who pays for it.
Thank you everyone for attending today. There's a list of speakers, list of material under the blue tent. There's a hand waving, just follow the hand and you can get whatever you need from them. Have a fabulous day and think about it.